Good morning, Hannah.
Very good
So
morning.
let me just spotlight, and I'll just oh, sorry, just a moment. I'll start sharing now the screen, and we can just a moment. For some reason, Zoom is not allowing me to share the screen.
Do you want me to share the screen, Drizzy?
No, okay, I got it now. Yes.
You
okay.
got it.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay. So let's begin our first session this morning with Sitian Liu from Sun Yat-sen University. She will present In Defense of Revolutionary Moral Fictionalism, a defense of revolutionary moral fictionalism. Sitian, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks to Jesse and Itano for giving me this opportunity to present my research on revolutionary moral fictionalism here, because it's very long, so I just say that MF during my presentation. And in this presentation, I will introduce MF and provide an analysis of several objections it has encountered, along with potential counter-argument. Furthermore, I will highlight MF's ability to force the development of other philosophical perspectives such as mental fictionalism and feminist ethics, and its utility in addressing the ethical challenges within AI ethics. And first, I will give a brief introduction about the MF's origin and its core tenets. RMF was proposed by Richard Joyce. It is mainly based on three theories. Mikey's theory. Mikey argued that moral facts do not exist, and third, all moral statements are false. And fictionalism, which holds that things like morality and mathematics do not need to be true to be good for us. But good here is not in a moral sense. It's just equal to usefulness or convenience to us. And IMF also learned from Darwinism, as it argues that morality is the revolution of morality is because it's in significance to human survival and adaptation. First, from an ontological perspective, IMF follows the Otto theory, which holds that moral facts do not exist. But because moral language and other moral-related concepts play crucial roles in making agreements and managing interpersonal relationships, and moral thinking also serves as safeguard against weakness of will. So it's better for us to continue to engage with morality as a fiction rather than just discarding it. There are four main approaches fictionalists suggest us to continue our moral discourse or moral practice. The first is make-believe. Make-believe is crucial for fictional morality, though it is always seen not as influential as real belief on the subject. And the decision to treat morality as a fiction is not as repeated calculation made by an individual. When we adopt morality as a fiction, it is best to see it as a kind of pre-commitment. Pre-commitment to morality denotes a habit of thought developed in the past, where the subject views certain types of actions are right and others are wrong. Third, when we are entering a store, the idea of stealing something might not even enter into our mind. To make fictional morality works well, fictionalists also suggest us to view moral practice as a prop-oriented make-believe game. Its purpose is to have us better understand the compilation of the game's props, such as paintings in art making or metaphors used in our conversations. Make-believe in this game is focused on the prompt itself, not on the fictional reality scenario caused by the prompt. When we make believe that moral facts exist and view moral discourse and moral actions as a game, just like children's role-playing game at home, the morality we were say in this game we were not care much about its existence. And this time, morality in the proposition, I have a moral obligation to keep my promise, and I'm morally allowed to break my promise will have the same nature and function as the fox in the metaphor. My English teacher is a fox. For how to continue our moral language after accepting the moral facts do not exist, pretending to assert is a good strategy for fictionalists. Suppose Nana decides to support a theory about carnage, that is, she believes that carnage do not exist and all assertions about carnage are false. Then we have a problem since Nana has already formed this philosophical belief, or her carnage speech should have changed. So how should we describe Nana's view on carnage and how to understand her statement on carnage, like the grass is green? To answer this question, we can learn from a more familiar context, turning our story. In this context, it's easy to put forward propositions we don't believe in. So when Nana says grass is green, we can concede that Nana is not asserting anything at all, but rather performing the act of pretending to assert that grass is green. However, all these strategies for maintaining moral language and practice for our convenience met with some objections. I will underline the four main objections here and give some responses. The first objection is about, sorry, the likes, yeah. The first objection to RMF is about the necessity of returning moral language. Some scholars believe that although theorists had better eliminate moral language instead of trying to save it through fiction, in the absence of commitment to ontology, it is also a point of contention whether there is still need to preserve it. For example, once phlogiston was proven not to exist, associate language was also discarded. Therefore, since moral facts are believed not to exist, moral language also should be discarded. And if everyone spoke in fictionalist way for a long time, how would this term retain the unnecessary metaphysical connotations? Furthermore, new members entering the community would not easy to understand that this term presupposes the existence of an absolute rational requirement. To respond to it, we can draw from Aristotle and common sense, which states that moral language serves a valuable purpose as it allows us to express our opinions accurately. Imagine attempting to communicate the importance of saving a drowning child, stating that it is legal to save the child or it is prudent to save the child, does not effectively convey the intended moral significance. In such situations, Moral language enables us to articulate our opinions more precisely and emphasize the ethical dimensions of our thoughts and actions. And for how new members use their STEM, they can completely obtain it through learning and communication. Just like children initially do not know about moral concepts, but through teaching and interactions, they will gradually understand it. And the second objection of RMF is about the comparison between fictional morality and real morality. Whether the fictional morality can work well and give motivation to us that the real morality is the fatal challenges that fictionists need to face. Some hold that moral fiction is actually a hypothesis. How an attitude of caution towards a set of norms and values can motivate in a fictional way. To respond to this question, we can consider the following examples. The first is imagine you are watching a well-known Japanese horror film at home alone in the evening. Even if you know that the plot is fictional and the scary character Sadako can't exist in reality, the shock of witnessing Sadako emerge from the TV might prompt you to call friends over for comfort, in case that the Sadako would emerge from your own TV, although it may never happen. Please click the PowerPoint. It's a little scary, but don't need to be scary here. And the second example involved children and the lesson of sharing. After reading a fairy tale about the importance of sharing, a child may become more likely to share the apple with others when asked. These examples demonstrate how humans can be influenced by seemingly trivial factors such as and non-existent things, such as fictional stories, when making their decisions. And the third objection is from the feasibility of moral make-believe. Because of the importance of real beliefs and their significance to us, the irrationality and impossibility of fictional belief accepts some of challenges. But is real belief necessarily good, or is there always a problem with fictional belief? Both of the answer is no. Real beliefs are not perfect and can sometimes even cause significant problems. For example, real beliefs about the less possibilities of success may prevent some people from making efforts and taking opportunities they were just waiting for new. At this time, make-believe about one's own chance of success is more needed, motivating the subject to take action rather than just giving it up. An important part for fictionalists to continue moral practice is to see it as a make-believe game. However, there is objection arise from the differences in prop-oriented games and content-oriented games, which raises the question, why can't moral fiction be considered as a content-oriented make-believe game? Because when we treat morality as the content in a make-believe game, we need a clear understanding of the concept of morality. Since content-oriented make-believe game focus on participation, if participants do not have sufficient understanding, they cannot join the game smoothly, let alone immerse themselves in it. Even with sufficient involvement, there is still a question, are we truly developing moral beliefs rather than just make believe that moral facts exist? Like an actor's involvement in a script, if the prop is not treated as real, it can easily feel out of place and fail to engage the audience. Therefore, at least during the game, it's difficult to ensure the participants are fully engaged in a moral fiction. On the contrary, prompt-oriented make-believe games do not require the immersion and excessive involvement of participants because the purpose of the game is to understand the prompt rather than the entire game itself. It allows the game to proceed smoothly under fewer constraints. That's why it is a better choice for fictionalists to choose prompt-oriented make-believe game, not content-oriented make-believe game. The last objection to IMF is about the unconstrained moral fictions. As there is multitude of possible fictions, and choosing among them is a hard problem for fictionalists, and for how to limit the scope of such fiction to avoid some negative results. Joyce gave the plausible response. He believes that the principle of IMF lies in guarding and constraining behaviors based on design-independent behavior pattern, and as Kant was right about the nature of moral concepts, while Hume was right about the nature of both practical rationality and the world. Therefore, moral fiction can be interpreted as a recommendation that we maintain our continued moral discourse as a way of conveying information about our human reasons. At this point, the human reasons provide a guideline to limit the scope of moral fiction. At further selection of fictional content, that is, how to make decisions about what moral norms we should make believe. After all, there are so many different factual moral norms that we can choose from. In this regard, we can consider the example of whether it is possible to fictionalize the view that turning innocent people is right into morality. Clearly, this view goes against existing moral requirements based on the current social environment, such as culture, daily moral function is unrealistic. If fictionalists need a feasible method or normative ethic standard for moral fiction, giving people's receptiveness and the challenges of make-believe, adopting a consequentialist moral fiction proves a suitable choice. However, fictions at the national level may struggle to gain individual recognition, while those focusing solely on individual interests are prone to significant disagreement. As utilitarianism offers clear moral judgment standards, asserting that an action is right if and only if it maximizes overall well-being. Therefore, a utilitarian moral fiction appears to be a better option. Fictionalists can choose to make believe in moral fictions that maximize overall well-being, thus simplifying their practice. Some may argue that fictionists claim that the necessity of employing the most useful fictions, but utilitarianism seems not to satisfy this condition. For instance, utilitarianism obligates us to save a child from drowning, even if it costs us to be late for work. This scenario might not align with the principle of personal utility. However, this argument is problematic, as our concern for other factors in our own purpose consequences, the well-being of others is also integrated into our happiness function, making the art of saving a drowning child consistent with choosing a useful fiction. After analyzing those options, we can find that Lord threat to IMF. It can defend improve itself by giving placebo responses. Moreover, it is a promising position after allotherapy with some advantages. Firstly, it offers viable paths for theoretical development grounded in allotherapy, as it explores new ways of continue our daily moral discourse and practice by proposing approaches like make-believe and pretending to assert. At the same time, it suggests us to engage in a prop-oriented make-believe game to follow agreed moral rules to sustain social order. Secondly, it helps promoting development in other fields. Is there still time left?
Sorry, like 2 minutes.
Okay, I will finish it soon. Drawing from IMF's central concepts, mental fictionalists propose considering the mind as an useful fiction. By adopting this perspective, it can reconcile our understanding of the mind with a more abstract conception that better aligns with contemporary insights in cognitive science and philosophy. IMF also benefits feminist ethics. For example, it helps feminists learn from the reflection of ethics of care, while promoting values differently from male-dominated ethics. The ethics of care also burdened women with moral obligations such as motherhood or empathy, limiting their happiness and growth. If certain moral rules are deeply ingrained in female minds, it might be more practical for them to adopt allotherapy in order to break free from these moral beliefs and treating moral rules as fictions rather than absolute truths. Female can decide which rules to embrace based on their practical benefits for gender equality and personal well-being. In addition, IMF can have an impact on the development of AI ethics. Given the uncertainty human face in many moral issues, the ideal approach is to train AI to think independently and to become a moral agent capable of determining the values and norms they need to adopt, as well as when to apply them. The choice of moral fiction in IMF is similar to this, so it can be applied to AI ethics. And considering AI's unique position as an ethical subject, potentially without moral beliefs, future research could explore how AI itself can offer fictional moral strategies for fictionalism. In addition, construct a fictionalist moral epistemology based on Henge epistemology so as to better defend this position is also worth of study. Okay, I finished my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sitian. We have time for questions. Let me just arrange here. Okay, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I have a very general doubt about moral fictionalism. It's more of a clarification question, okay? So you started with Mackey's error theory and the problem of grounding moral beliefs and moral truths on moral facts, right? Mackey's error theory is famously that all moral judgments, all moral sentences are false, right? So
Yeah.
don't we have the same problem? Isn't fictionalism just postponing the problem to another domain, right? You have a difficulty with moral problems, and then you solve that problem by saying, well, all moral facts are fictional facts. But now you have a problem about fictional facts, about what grounds fictional facts. You understand? So I think there is would you say it's just postponing the problem, or would you say moral facts can be grounded on fictional facts, and fictional facts are basic, so to speak? Or we have to say we have to be anti-realists about fictional facts as well. So that would be the question. Thank you once again for your presentation.
Thank you for your question. I think the revolutionary moral fictionalism is actually a moral anti-realist position. Yeah, it wants to support the adversary because there are some problems that the adversary needs to face. So I don't think the fictionalists suggest us to accept fictional. Sorry, what you said about the fictional
facts?
Oh yeah, I don't think it's a fictional facts. It's just a thing that in our mind. It's just moral fiction, and we need to make it as a game. And whatever we say as in the past, we need to believe that moral facts existed, but now the fictionalists advise us to make believe that moral facts existed. Yeah, not treat it as a fictional facts, I think.
Great, thank you. Do we have more questions? Okay, so Hisham, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the talk. My question is related to what Ye just said, because I think it's a very good point that if we reduce moral facts to the realm of fiction, then we would, I think, have to blur the line that separates reality and fiction. And I think this is a dangerous route to take. And that, especially as you know, that there is now the question of morality within fiction itself, that, for example, what would be a moral response towards, for example, murder or rape within fiction. And usually we treat this as somehow being different from how we would react to questions of morality in reality. So it would be more serious to, for example, to condone rape in reality than it would be to condone rape in fiction. So how would you approach this problem of blurring the line that separates fiction and reality vis-a-vis morality?
Thank you for your question. It's a very important question, and it's also a question that fictionists need to respond. I think, yeah, just as I also mentioned in my presentation, that someone may inquiry if the fictional morality can motivate our actions at the real or the moral facts motivate us to do. If we can still make some moral actions and practice like before. I think, of course, we cannot like do the moral judgments or actions like the moral list. But like what I said, it's a suggestion. If we say it's if we hold that the moral facts do not exist, then it's a bad choice to say it as a fiction. So it can still, we can still enjoying the convenience of the moral discourse or moral practice. But for the usefulness of the morality, it can not be like the before. It can give us the motivation, but we can still make moral judgments and moral practice because there is still, like what I mentioned, that we can still take the utilitarian moral fiction, which can help us to make some moral judgments. Yeah, that's what I think.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you, Sitian. Once again, thank you for your presentation, for your responses. And now we have a presentation by Felipe de Carvalho. Felipe, can you try sharing your slides
Sure.
if you have them?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Felipe de Carvalho from Universidade Federal de Lavras, Brazil, will present Feeling Together for Anna Karenina, a social externalist account of emotions in fiction. Felipe, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I think my computer just froze for a moment. Can you hear me? Well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to put it on full screen and it just froze. Yeah, so can you see the slides moving?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks so much, and thank you to the organizers for putting together this great colloquium. And it's a pleasure to be here talking to you about these topics. So today I'll be presenting some recent work that I've been developing on emotions and fiction. And I'll try to argue in favor of a more social and externalist approach to understanding what it means to have emotions in the context of our practices of reading fiction. So this was originally a 45-minute that I condensed into a 20-minute one. So if anything is not very clear, we can talk about this later in the Q&A. So just to introduce the topic, clearly emotions are central in our engagements with fictional narratives, and a large part of what we value in a narrative is precisely its capacity to emotionally affect us, to involve us effectively. And yet, there is something paradoxical about reacting emotionally to fictional events. That is, how can we fear Hannibal Lecter or despise Jar Jar Binks or pity Selma from Dancing in the Dark when we know very well they do not exist, right? They're just figment of someone's imagination. And for those of you who are familiar with literature on emotions in fiction, will recognize this as the paradox of fiction, which concerns precisely how can we feel emotions towards objects that we know that do not exist. And originally, in this form, the paradox being formulated by Radford in this 75 paper, How Can We Be Moved by the Fate of Anna Karenina? And the paradox arises from a conjunction of these three propositions. So number one, we feel genuine pity for Anna Karenina. That is, it's not like fake pity or anything. We're genuinely moved by her fate. But number two, feeling pity genuinely requires an existential belief in the object of pity. But number three, we do not believe Anna Karenina exists. We know she's only a fictional character. So when we have these three propositions together, then we have a paradox in our hands. But of course, we must ask whether we have good reasons for holding these three propositions, because only if we have good reasons for holding the three of them together, then we have a paradox in our hands. And most people who are not familiar with the paradox, they think that number two is a little bit fishy. Like, do we have good reasons to hold on to two? And what are the reasons that we have for that? Because on the face of it, this just seems to speak against common sense and against our ordinary experience, in the sense that, for example, we have emotions towards like daydreams, imaginings, hypothetical reasoning, counterfactual reasoning, and so on, even if the situations that we feel emotions towards are not real. For example, you can feel disgusted at the thought of your partner being physically intimate with another person, even if you know that's not actually taking place. You can be disappointed at the thought of not getting the job you applied to, if that is not really happening, right? And so we have routinely emotions towards states of affairs that are not real, right? And interestingly, Florian Koval and Fabrice Terroni, they ran like an empirical study just to test people's intuitions concerning proposition 2. And they found that most like lay people, non-expert, non-philosophers, they did not accept number 2. And most interestingly, the reason that most of them gave for rejecting number 2 was precisely because we feel emotions toward fictional characters. So number 2 cannot be true. So I think we do not have good reasons to hold on to number 2, which means that the paradox of fiction is somehow dissolved. But still, even if we accept that, well, it's not a paradox after all, still, even if we hold on just to number 1 and number 3, still reveals something interesting about our engagements with fiction that needs to be better understood, in the sense that, as Josh Landy puts it in a 2012 book, engagements with fiction involve some type of lucid self-delusion, as he puts it. So the idea is that, well, you engage with this fictional events as if they were real, like you react emotionally just as you would if these events were really taking place, but while at the same time you know very well they're not real. So this is what he means by a lucid self-delusion. So you have like, we feel genuine pity for Anna Karenina and we know she does not exist. That's interesting, right? To understand better what's going on in this case, what is this kind of lucid self-delusion that Landy is talking about. So it's still a puzzling aspect of experience and of our practices of reading fiction that involves adopting this kind of lucid self-delusion that needs to be better understood. And this raises all sorts of interesting questions. For example, what is it to become emotionally involved with a fictional narrative? And what are the functions of emotions in the context of our practices of reading fiction, right? What role do they play in these practices? And is the fictionality of our engagements with fiction part of our reading experience? Like, how are we aware, that these narrated events are moving us, but still, we are somehow aware that it's only a fiction? How is this part of the structure of our experience? So this is some of the issues that I'll be talking about today. And my main argument here is that reading fiction can and should be understood as a kind of shared social cultural practice of make-believe, and hopefully it'll be clear what I mean by this. But I want to say that emotions in the context of these practices, they serve certain social functions like virtual intellectual signaling, emotional contagion, as well as to influence the behavior of others, signs of group affiliation, and so on. But they're also useful as embodied performers of narrative worlds. So our emotions in fiction, they are at the same time like they directed inwards towards the fictional world, but also outwards towards the people who partake in this practice with us. And so I will argue. So in the short time that I have today, I'll quickly go through these proposals because I will keep a little bit from each one of these proposals. So first, I'll talk about Walton's idea of engagements with fiction as internalized games of make-believe, to move on to Derek Matraver's idea of engagements with fictions in terms of performance and transportation to narrative worlds, to Maria Povnen and Caracciolo's idea of engagements with fiction as joint embodied recreations of narrative worlds, to arrive at my own proposal of engagements with fictions in terms of shared social cultural practice of make-believe. So the emotions we feel towards fiction be understood in the context of these shared social cultural practices. So to start with Walton, he has a very well-known theory of reading fiction, of our engagement with the representational arts in general, according to which to engage with the fictional narrative or any kind of representational art is to take part in an internalized game of make-believe. So in the sense that fictions to also involve imaginative prescriptions, right? These are the norms that govern the practice of reading novels, right? So when you read a novel, you tacitly agree to make believe everything that you encounter in the book. So if you're reading Lord of the Rings and you complain that orcs do not exist, it seems that you just did not understand what it is to read fiction in the first place, right? Because you must tacitly agree to make believe what you encounter in the novel. And Walton introduces this idea through an example using Charlie. So Charlie is watching a horror film in which there's like a green slime that's trying to take over the world. And in Walton's example, like Charlie is terrified. His pulse quickens, his heart is beating fast, he clutches his seat, he hides beneath the blanket, and so on. And Walton says that Charlie is like a child, Timmy, who's playing a game of make-believe with his father. So it's an analogy with children's games of make-believe. So in the same way, Timmy, the child, like is running and screaming and scared of the monster, and his father is making these ugly faces and chasing him, and so on and so forth. So Walton says that both Charlie and Timmy are actors representing themselves. So Charlie represents himself as someone who's scared of a slime. Timmy represents himself as someone who's scared of a monster with the aid of certain props or environmental scaffolds, such as a book, or in the child's game, a sofa may become a mountain, and so on, generating fictional truth. So everything that happens in the context of these practices is a fictional truth. So if Charlie is afraid of the slime, it is fictional that Charlie is afraid of the slime. If Timmy flees the monster, it is fictional that Timmy flees the monster, and so on. And as a consequence, we do not have genuine emotions when reading fiction, only make-believe emotions, because everything that happens in the context of these practices is make-believe, right? So to use Walton's terminology, we have like quasi-emotions. And he's pretty clear about this. And he writes like, was Charlie terrified of the slime? I think not. Granted, Charlie's conditions is similar in certain obvious respects to that of a person frightened of a pending real-world disaster. His muscles are tense, he clutches his chair, his pulse quickens, his adrenaline flows. Let us call this physiological, psychological state quasi-fear, but it alone does not constitute genuine fear. So while we have, like, on the one hand, beliefs, desires, and perceptions that cause emotions with a direct link to actions toward the objects of these emotions, we have also make-believe desires and imaginings that cause quasi-emotions without a direct link to actions towards the object of these quasi-emotions. So to Walton, to read the fictional narratives, just to take part in this internalized game of make-believe. And he introduced this idea through an analogy with children's games in the sense that both involve imaginative prescriptions and are devices that generate fictional truths. So everything that happens in the activity is only make-believe. Thus, the emotions felt towards fiction are make-believe emotions. So regardless of what we think about Walton's theory or how we evaluate this theory, and I don't have time to do that today, but we can still ask, like, why reading novel is such an emotionally charged experience? Like, why do we have emotions in the context of these practices? And if we think of reading fiction in terms of make-believe, in games of make-believe, of course, one immediate answer that comes to mind is that emotions make the game of make-believe more immersive to the players, right? So the more Timmy, the child, like gets into the character and screams and runs and shows fear towards the monster, the more immersive the game will be. And the same to the father. The father makes these ugly faces and screams like a monster, and shows anger or the will to catch the child and so on. The game will be much more immersive. So without emotions, it seems like the game or the novel, we just fail to involve us, to capture us. So we need emotions just to make the game more immersive. That's the one idea here. And this runs in the direction of a proposal by Derek Matravers, according to which, so he disagrees with Walton, and I don't have time also to run through the argument, that reading fiction should not be cashed out in terms of make-believe, but just in terms of like some kind of transport mechanism to a fictional world, to the narrative world. So when you read Lord of the Rings, you become transported to Middle-earth. If you read War and Peace, you become transported to the Napoleonic Wars in Russia and so on. So Derek says, Matravers says that some mechanism here is needed, which will take as input in verbal representation the words on the page, and as output, you being transported to another world, the world of the book, of the narrative. And what the theorist must do, the role of the theorist is just to characterize what this mechanism could be. And that's what he attempts to do in the book. And he does this by borrowing Richard Garrick's work on the psychology of reading, because this is also something that Garrick tries to do. So Garrick uses two metaphors to characterize what it is to read fiction, right? So he talks in terms of performance and transport. So performance should be understood like quite literally. So think about like an actor performing a text while rehearsing for a role. So what will the actor do? He or she will not just read the text in a cold and distant manner, but they will perform the text, right? So they will read, like they become emotionally involved with the scene and show emotions and adopt a certain tone of voice, a certain body posture, and so on. And the more emotionally involved the actor becomes, the better he will perform the text. And Garrick is pretty explicit about this. So he thinks that the same set of psychological embodied skills that the actors deploy in performing the text while rehearsing for a role is also something that readers do when performing a novel, for example. And the better you perform the novel, the more emotionally involved you become, the more efficient this transport mechanism will be. So you become transported to the world, the narrative, in virtue of how you perform the narrative and emotions. So here, there's a clear function for emotions, right? So they're part of your performance. And the more emotionally involved you become, the better this transport mechanism to the narrative world. So Garrick talks of emotions here in terms of participatory responses, which he defines in terms of non-inferential responses that occur in the reader's active participation in the narrative. So according to Garrick, we do not just passively read the text, but we engage with the text in an active manner. And he has like all these sorts of participatory responses that, well, he's not making it up. Look, he has like just a lot of empirical studies to show that people will actually do this much more often than we think. So when people are reading Anna Karenina, for example, they might think like all these thoughts like, oh, poor Anna, or don't listen to Karenina, he doesn't really love you. Or, oh, I hope she'll not be deceived by Vronsky, he's such a liar, and so on. And this is actually pretty common. I remember my grandmother watching Brazilian soap operas, and she did this all the time, like talking to the characters, engaging with the characters. Something people do quite often. And of course, but you do not have to linguistically articulate these thoughts. If you just pity Anna, if you feel pity for Anna as you're reading the book, there to be some sort of participatory responses that you show by feeling the emotion in the context of your reading activity. So this is one role for the emotion. So what can we say about this proposal? And I agree with Matravers and Garrick that part of what we do when reading fiction is to be, to become transported into a narrative world. That's why we seek fiction. That's why we become so caught up and so involved, in when reading a book. And that emotions are undoubtedly part of the performance that enrich the narrative world and make this transport mechanism more efficient. But maybe I will only call into question like how solitary this process really is, in the sense that I think there's like a double aspect of our practice of reading fiction. that this theory does not capture. And that is the sense in which fictional narratives that they are like public artifacts created by intentional agents. Now, of course, now we have like books, novels that are created by artificial agents that might create some complications, but I'll not go into that at the time. So I'll just presuppose there are public artifacts created by intentional agents, because what's important here is that we engage not only with the narrated events, but also with the book's artifactuality. That's like a part of our reading experience, right? So this means that there's internal and external aspect of our practice. Internal, I mean like internal to the narrated events, to the fictional world, and external, which concerns the book's artifactuality. And Travers and Garrick might describe very well what's going on in this internal aspect, how we become involved with the narrated events, but they leave this external aspect out altogether. And this is something that might be worth exploring. For that, Maria Povnen has some very interesting work in that area. And she says we read fiction from a double position. According to her, we are at the same time those to whom the narrator directs the story, she calls this the narrative audience, as well as those to whom the author directs the work, the authorial audience. And she says that these two audience positions exist simultaneously in readers' experience and make it possible for us to be engaged with both the events and the artifactual nature of a fiction. The fact that it is a public artifact created by intentional agent, that's someone, that's an author there that's created that narrative world, is also part of our experience, is also part of our participatory responses when we read fiction. So the way she understands this double aspect, she says that the practice of reading fiction is really an activity of joint attention between author and reader, like both attend to the same object, which is the narrative world. And we need to be careful to understand joint attention here, because most people have in mind like the central paradigm cases of, say, for example, child and caretaker interaction as they are engaged with the same object in a current online interaction. But we do not need to build on these central cases. Of course, I cannot have an occurrent interaction with Tolstoy because he wrote Anna Karenina in the 19th century. He's been dead for over a century, so I cannot have a current interaction with Tolstoy. But what Povnen means by joint attention, just that your experience of the book and of the world of the narrative, the world in which Anna Karenina lives, is intertwined with your experience of this world was created by Tolstoy, for example. Now, in this, she's joined by Marco Caracciolo, who says the readers enter into dialogue with the author because they join him or her in attending to a fictional world. So both forms of attention do not be in real time, but just in the sense that when you read the book, you also, the experience that someone attended to that narrative world is also part of your experience. So I think this calls for like not a solitary notion of performance, but more like a joint notion of performance between reader and author. And I think one kind of evidence that we have that the author's attention upon the novel is also part of experience, we have these kinds of external participatory responses when reading fiction as well. For example, when you finish a chapter and you might think this thought like, oh, I cannot believe that he, she, or they will leave me hanging in suspense for another chapter. No, you bastard. Or you can be angry at the author for ending the novel in a certain manner. As another anecdotal piece of evidence, I remember when I was a teenager and I read 1984, and I was so mad at George Orwell for the way he ended the book. No spoilers here, but I just like threw the book on the wall at that time. So this is like, I think it is an interesting evidence that the author is there, as part of our experience. Sometimes it'll be more in the background, sometimes it'll be foregrounded, but still, and it's also part of our experience. And we do have this sort of external participatory responses. So here we are already going towards a more social externalist approach, but I think we can go even further in bringing other people and the social character more highlighted in this practice. Because, well, I said the fictional narratives are public artifacts created by intentional agents, but they're also shared in the network of practices and institutions that sustain them, like other readers, authors, editors, critics, scholars, publishing companies, and so on. And in as much as we have this like cultural stereotype, of a solitary reader, in reading a novel, reading practices are actually not solitary. They are shared social cultural practices, like we read to children, we read to the elderly. We have like book clubs and reading groups and study groups, research groups, and so on. There's a very interesting book by Argentinian writer Alberto Manguel on the history of reading. And he writes about this, how for much of human history, storytelling and reading in particular was a collective activity, like a family would do that together in the household and so on. It's only very recently that we began reading alone. But this should not distract us from the fact that reading is a shared social cultural practice. And just like every human practice on the planet, emotions here have a function as signs of group affiliation. So in any kind of practice, to have the right emotions in the right context shows to others that you are a reliable member of the group. And in the context of reading fiction, this is pretty clear. That's why, just to conclude, I'm almost done here, that I think we should conceive engagements with fictional narratives as shared social cultural games of make-believe. So I'm keeping this bit from Walton of games of make-believe, but I understand games of make-believe in a different sense that Walton does. So I think what I mean to say with games of make-believe is just to capture this double aspect of our engagements with fiction, right? So in the same way that when Timmy is playing with his father and the sofa becomes a mountain, Timmy is aware at the same time of the mountain and of the sofa. So games of make-believe has this character that you're aware at the same time, of the game of make-believe and of the object that serves as prop. So aware of the narrative world and of the object that serves as prop, the book, as created by an intentional agent. But also, I disagree that it's an internalized game of make-believe, but it's a shared social cultural practice game of make-believe. So to conclude, reading practices are social practices, and as a social practice, emotions will arise in the context of this practice as shared emotions with at least three functions, like emotional contagion, virtual intellectual signaling, influencing the behavior of others. So you want someone to read a book, so they can learn something like a moral fact or so on. The way you react to the book will make the person want to read the book, for example. And if you think of a group of people reading the Bible in a church, if you feel moved by the same passages, you show others that you're a good Christian. With the meeting of a Communist Party, you feel outraged by the same passages of the Communist Manifesto. You also show others that you're a reliable member of the party. Teenagers reading Harry Potter and feeling the same emotions towards the same passages, they also show they are a reliable member of the group. And all these different functions, they combine to yield the integrated emotional experience of reading. So I think there's a much more, the social influence of the emotions we feel in reading fiction are much more pervasive than we think. So our emotions do not go like from the inside out, but from the outside in. So that's why I think we need to have like all these different levels to understand what it is to feel emotions in the context of reading fiction. Our emotions directed towards the narrated events, but also at the book's artifactuality, the fact that there's an author there that we can have participatory responses towards, but also our emotions go outwards towards the others who partake in this practice with us. So that's it for today. Sorry if it was kind of quick, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Felipe. We have time. We have 3 minutes for questions. Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm just quickly wondering, So if I disagree with you on a novel, say I really don't like the style, I didn't get into it really, then I'm not a member of or I'm not a good member of the community, or do I have to be schooled? You know, do I have to be told, no, you know, you should enjoy this and here's the right emotion, so please, or, you know, look for new friends.
Well, it might depend. So there are certain social groups in which a certain book will play a big role or a small role. So like the Bible, for example, in a for Christians might play a bigger role of saying, oh, I don't agree with this passage. No, I don't not think that this is what Jesus is trying to do. Then yeah, you might become expelled from the group, or in the communist in the Communist Party example as well. If you say, no, this is bollocks. I don't agree with what Marx and Engels are saying here. You might be expelled from the group. But you know, in some other cases, the book will not be so central to the group. It might be some other social factors that might determine whether you are or not a reliable member of the group. So I think it would depend on the case.
Okay, Fiora? You're muted. Sorry, I think you are muted. Can you?
Yes,
Yeah,
I was muted. Sorry, I was trying to be fast and then I slowed everyone down. So quickly, 2 points. Hi, Felipe. So the first point is, I'm not sure that your account is really different from Walton. I think it may be a development actually of Walton's account, because Walton builds on this analogy with children's games of make-believe, which he defines as social imaginative activity. So the social dimension is really important. And you have all the constraints and the rules of the game that guide, afford, but also limit, in a sense, what is allowed and what is not allowed in the social group playing the game. So I get this normative dimension. And then the second point, and I'll finish, I have a strange, so I don't know why you think of social groups in this sort of dystopian way. So it seems like they need to virtue signal to be a member of a group and have no identity of your own. So as long as you say, I abide to, or I conform to what the group, whatever that is, decides that is acceptable, then I am a member of the group. If I diverge in some ways, then I'm not a member anymore, or you do something that is not, that would grant expulsion. Okay, so I don't know why you think of groups in this way. I get the normative dimension. I think it should be there, but I don't know why you bring it to such an extreme, right, case where individuals have no role to play anymore. Okay, I'll stop because we don't have time, but very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and long time no see. Good to see you again after so many years. So first part about Walton. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot about Walton's approach that I like, and the element that you mentioned, like the social care parts of the games of make believe. That's exactly what I want to keep. Now, like he has also a big focus on make believe as something like categorically different from belief. In these parts, I do not really want to take on board. But yeah, you're right. I'm open to that, being a development of these more social parts of games of make believe. And as to the second part, I think that's the fault of short presentation. Need to move quickly towards that. I do not think of groups in this dystopian way. There's like, if you do not, you better be angry at this part or you kick out from the group. Of course not. We have many ways to show signs of group affiliation. And it's not going to be all or nothing. It's not going to be like a checklist. If you show like 10 signs of group affiliation, then you're a member of the group. Otherwise, you're out. But it's clear that like emotions are signs. It can function as signs of group affiliation. Your group, they laugh at the same jokes. They feel angry about the same events. Like it depends on what the glue that brings the group together. Some political groups, like leftist political groups, they'll be outraged by certain political events. And of course, you might not feel outraged by some particular event, but you're still part of the group, because there's many ways that you can, become part of the group. But I had to move quickly and make my argument in one slide. So kind of, I see that might sound this way, but it's not what I mean. I don't see groups in that way.
If I don't hate Jar Jar Binks, I'm not a true fan of Star Wars, right?
Yeah, see, that's a great example.
Okay, Hisham?
Hello. So thank you for the talk. It was very interesting indeed. My question is about your thesis, your argument that reading is a sociocultural practice. And as you know, readers are distinct, so they can be distinct with regards to their social backgrounds, social training, academic training, artistic training, some psychological aspects can also come into play. And I think an argument follows from this that since readers are distinct, their emotional responses to fiction can also vary. And my question is, what emotions then would be appropriate? Like, for example, someone can be can feel anger towards a work of art, whereas another person can feel happiness or delight towards the same work of art. So then this reading, I think, is too generalist to take readers as it's kind of an idealized thesis, I would say. So how would you approach this idea of distinct readers?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And what I was trying to do with this work is that, well, when I read like Travers and Garrick, so they focus a lot on individual readers, right? So it's like each person, will bring their own personal history and their own values to the book. So when you create the narrative world, when you construct the narrative world, you like use your your background. So each person will have like a distinct narrative world, like the way you imagine Middle-earth when you read Lord of the Rings, different from how I imagine, because we have different experiences and in the way we visualize the mountains of Mordor and so on. And I think this is right to some extent, but I wanted to emphasize that also some of the way we imagine and react emotionally to things and have moral judgment towards things has also a strong social component, right? And because we're part of social groups, and like you may have a group of friends who are really into Lord of the Rings, and they're very excited about this. And when you approach the book, you already have some certain predispositions to approach the book in a certain way. So I think the social aspect, individual aspect, will interact, even in certain interesting ways that we need to investigate and think about further how these two things interact. But I just wanted to highlight that there is this social dimension that these theories are living out, right? But you're right that I think both of these things will interact.
Okay, we are out of time for questions, but thank you once again, Felipe, for your presentation, your responses to the questions.
Thank you.
And now let's hear Ivan. Ivan, feel free to share your slides.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me
Good
fine?
morning. Yes.
Yes, so I will, this is, can you see my slides? Yeah. Do they pass from one to the other?
Yes.
Yes, okay, this is great. So it's all working. So good morning. Thank you, Jerzy. Thank you, Italo, for the organization of this nice colloquium. It's really nice to be here. Last time you organized, I just was watching from far away, but then, well, now I have the opportunity to present something. Well, my talk's called Understanding Imagination in Otto Neurath's Utopianism. And, well, this might sound very strange because most people know Otto Neurath as a member of the Vienna Circle, a logical empiricist. But, well, Neurath is not the most common kind of Vienna Circle member of logical empiricists. For starters, he's interested in economics and the social sciences. Also, he had intense political activism, so his main occupation was actually politician not philosopher or anything like that, or university professor. He was never one. He was active in the period called Red Vienna or Rotes Wien between 1919 and 1934. Yeah, okay. Now I can see my own slides. All right. So I won't have time to talk much about Otto Neurath's philosophy, so I'll just piece some parts of what he proposes, and we will get to fiction at some point. So Neurath's philosophy of science is quite well known because of this passage, or mostly that passage is known, but not really his philosophy of science as a whole. He says in a 1932 text that there's no way to establish fully secured, neat protocol statements as starting points of the sciences. There is no tabula rasa. We are like sailors who have to rebuild their ship on the open sea without ever being able to dismantle it in dry dock and reconstruct it from the best components. So this is Neurath's boat. It's the idea that we're never able to make our knowledge or our experience or practices of the world perfect as we would like them to be. We're in a situation of crisis in which our knowledge, our life, our social situation, political system is falling apart, and we cannot put what we consider to be the best in place of it. We can only be making small reforms, like rebuilding it slowly as we try to just keep floating. So a little more unknown part of Neurath's philosophy of science is his relation of epistemology and politics. So he says in a 1940-something text that was only discovered and published in 1996, he says that democratic education accepts from the beginning that there must be difference of opinion based on commonly known facts. So sort of a relation between politics and knowledge of facts appears there. Also, he says that in the same page, in the same paragraph actually, democracy is in fact a continual struggle between the expert who knows everything and makes decisions and the common person with just enough information to hold the power of the expert in check. So this is the idea that, people in a democracy are supposed to hold the expert in check, to put this person under scrutiny. And what's called democracy implies the rejection of experts in making decisions. So I put some 3 points there. It's, well, when community sees feeds, when there's reason for that, and then, well, there's all these situations. Well, then we can characterize Neurath's philosophy of science and technology, saying that basically scientific knowledge is conventional. This is in Neurath's boat, so it's the idea that we can only reconstruct it with what we have, and the idea that we're constantly contemplating different possibilities. So, well, we could have another boat, we could have another ship, we could build like this or like that, but we not always are able to do that. So technological proposals, they are always partial in the sense that there's always a point of view. They're made in a specific situation with some problem in view, some problem in perspective. And finally, in a democratic outlook, a plurality of proposals and as much information as possible are important, not to determine the decisions. Neurath doesn't believe that knowledge can determine decisions, but to make decisions as informed as possible. So this is basically the idea. So we have a situation, we have this perspective in which we have uncertain situations and bottom-up decisions. So the ideal democratic situation for Neurath is one in which facing uncertain situations, we should be able to have decisions come from bottom-up, from people to experts, and not the other way around. Okay, but in this sense, Neurath claims that in this perspective of social science in a technological perspective, Neurath claims that there must be plans. This is an interesting aspect. Even though he has these bottom-up decisions, there must be plans. And more than that, a plurality of plans, lots of plans. Otherwise, there are no decisions really. So we must be able to look at different things and choose. And so he says that in order to have this plurality of plans, and this is why I'm bringing this topic to this colloquium, the social sciences should incorporate a utopianist methodology to increase the variety and our understanding of plans. So he says in a 1944 text, we suggest using the term utopia for any kind of invented order, pleasant or unpleasant. So it includes dystopias, includes other sorts of perspectives, not just the good society or anything. Plausible or implausible. Says, well, we're not really able to judge, so plausible or implausible for maker and reader, so for writer and to audience alike. So basically, the idea is that the social sciences have too meager a point of view or a scope of experiences if they look just to existing society and past societies. So social science should also study invented societies, imaginary society or fictional societies, in order to learn more about what our own social knowledge implies or how it articulates with we can imagine or we can perceive. So basically, this is the point of view. So decisions as to implement or not the plans are outside of the scope of expert scientific knowledge. So we use scientific knowledge to make plans, but well, we don't decide about the plans with scientific knowledge. So Neurath considers in the end that model decisions, he writes this when he's in England, so this is, as I understand, a very British concept of model decisions is a situation in which you're not really sure and you go back and forth and you decide and you undecide and you decide otherwise. The idea that model decisions, they present a better outlook in the long run as communities take a leading role in the planning process. So this, for Neurath, is better than base the decisions in optimum standards that can be determined by scientific or economic or anything, or planning knowledge or something like that. So when you think about utopias as a kind of fiction or imaginative work, utopias are going to suit this need for model decisions, because as fiction or imaginative work, they are open to multiple interpretations and points of view. So this is the focus of the idea I'm bringing here. So if we follow just the order of the thought, it's just from uncertain situations, we can only have conventional knowledge because, well, knowledge is not certain because situations are not certain. And from conventional knowledge, we can only have partial technological proposal. That means from a certain perspective, from a certain point of view and all. And from partial technological proposals, we can only have indeterminate decisions. Because if we could have certain knowledge of certain situations, then we could have determinate decisions, but we don't. So basically, we have to make do with model decisions, and this is basically Neurath's idea. I've been writing about Neurath's utopias for a while. I think since 2015 with this paper on in Principia, in which I said that in Neurath's sense, utopias and also dystopias, because of his valuation ambiguity, can be regarded as models of social science in technological contexts. Also, more recently, this is my latest paper, Neurath's utopianism can be understood in the framework of cultural modernism, specifically Viennese modernism, early 20th century. And this also connects Neurath's utopianism to A.G. Wells. This is the point in my most recent paper. Also, I've been writing with a colleague from Vienna that Neurath's methodology for the social sciences can be understood as a form of thought experimenting. And so we discuss how this, what does it mean and everything that, well, we have utopias against the background of theoretical or common knowledge of social situations. Well, so following from this point of view, I understand that Neurath's utopias and his whole idea of planning aim at empowering communities. That's the idea, which I understand as providing communities with a plurality of plans and with enough knowledge so they can make informed decisions. So they hold the power to keep the experts in check, to keep the experts under surveillance. And my point today is that it seems that this sense of empowering communities, since it involves the development of fictional social plans, requires some sort of educating or training the imagination. So I've been working on this. I do not expect to reach actually a conclusion here about this, but it seems to me that this is it, and this is what I'm trying to investigate. So I'm using for that, to reach that aim, recent studies on fiction and imagination to try to understand Neurath's proposed methodology. And here perhaps it's something that my audience today might know better. So I took Liu van Leeuwen's The Meanings of Imagine. He says there are three senses of imagination: constructive, an attitudinal, and an imagistic imagination. I'm going to talk about the first two. The third one will be for another opportunity. Constructive sense of imagining is the idea that imagining is a process in which one generates representation. So in Neurath's utopianism, this is basically the focus of the whole idea. The social sciences can provide data and analysis of data in order to enrich a community's imagination. So to fuel like constructing, the constructive process of imagining. So if we have more info on unemployment or industrial production, housing, public transportation, etc., we can imagine alternative ways to rearrange our social order, to rebuild our ship in the open sea, and well, we'll be able to imagine different usages for the pieces of our ship. So we have so social scientific knowledge can help us judge the possibilities, like possibilities of, so we can really construct more from that point of view. And then in the second sense of attitudinal imagination, when one imagines something, one is treating that something as fictional, as opposed to real, or a thing, something like that. But the point is that not everything that's produced by constructive imagining is treated as imagining in the attitudinal sense. So Van Leeuwen's example is with a detective engages in a constructive imaginative process to figure out how a crime was committed, where non-pieces of evidence constrain her imagining. But the detective in this case, she actually believes that the crime was actually committed like that. So the attitude is not the same as in regard to fiction. So, but it's also another sense of imagining. In this sense, I think Neurath argues that utopias should not be considered simply as fiction, as impossible dreams or flights of fancy, but we should treat them the same way we treat engineering projects. That means that we're going to put utopias in a context in which we look at them and we'll have to consider them as something that could be real, could be constructed, but perhaps we don't have the technology to produce them, or perhaps we consider that they will cause more trouble than we have already, or perhaps they are incomplete or naive for ignoring some relevant aspect of the problem. I mean, here we are dealing with the imaginary social orders, and we are already trying to decide if they are actually utopias or utopias, or if they are dystopias, or if they are adequate or inadequate or something like that. But then our attitude towards utopias, they are not the same attitude as in regard to fiction, I think. Perhaps you may help me correct that or something like that. So our attitude towards them does not seem to be the same as the one we have towards fiction, nor is it the same as the attitude we hold towards accounts of actual states of affairs. As well, we don't react as if utopias were real. I mean, we just look at them differently here, apparently. However, the utopian tradition seems to transgress this boundary, so it keeps coming and going. Sometimes we read utopias as fiction, and I like Huxley's Brave New World as an example, because we can read that just to have fun, or just to, you know, to have the experience of fiction or something like that, or we can take it seriously in political debate. And the point is that Aldous Huxley wanted us to read Brave New World as a serious point of view in a serious political debate. So it is a fictional description of a social arrangement, but it is meant to be taken seriously in a debate. I mean, in the debate of how we're going to do politics or ethics surrounding technology, or, you know, society organization and all that part. So when I understand that the utopia tradition seems to transgress this boundary, like you can sometimes read them as fiction, or sometimes you can take it seriously in political discourse. Sometimes you can just shrug off and say, well, I don't want that. So considering this that I was discussing just now, in this utopian attitude, we are invited to use our social scientific knowledge or common knowledge of social matters to further develop or to extract consequences from the utopia. This comes closer to the idea of thought experimenting. And this makes us return to Van Leeuwen's first sense of imagination, which is the constructive sense of imagining. He says, well, one of the points here is that what governs constructive imagination. So he brings up another interesting example, which is we should imagine a female lion in the bushes looking out on a herd of grazing antelope. Then imagine she charges them. What do you imagine next? It's not in the statement what do you have to imagine, but you guessed it. You imagine that the antelope run away and the antelope are alive, or something like that. So he says that belief governance thesis is the idea that constructive imagination uses beliefs by default to infer new imaginings from imaginings that we have already occurred. So something like this happens. But then when we look at the certain genres, we could have a different governance, different idea. So he says certain contextual cues, I mean, I'm quoting from Van Leeuwen's, like mention of magic or spaceships, trigger the use of genre truth attitudes for purposes of inferential elaboration on initial imaginings. So if we're reading Brave New World, we know that there are no magic. There's no magic or Harry Potter's spells or something like that. They have helicopters, and that's basically it. But they have clones, and they have drugs and all of that. So Van Leeuwen proposes this genre truth governance thesis, which is the idea that in the context of specific genres, constructive imaginations uses genre truth attitudes in addition to the relevant beliefs to infer new imaginings from imaginings that have already occurred. So it seems to me that utopias have their own genre that governs what is acceptable following current scientific or common knowledge of social matters. So basically, this is my preliminary conclusion in my research to try to understand how imagination plays a role in Neurath's utopianism, is that I don't know if in general literature or in philosophy, utopias can be considered like that. I wouldn't go so far today, but I hope to get to a conclusion about that. But in Neurath's view, utopia seems to be a specific genre of text, of something that's in between fiction and science, that uses scientific or common knowledge to derive acceptable ideas in that perspective, and they are to be used like that. And then here for today, I have an extra, a byproduct of my argument, which is more provocative, and now I break the fourth wall. It seems that this approach seems to corroborate, although indirectly, the artifactualist approach to fiction, because in the opposite approaches, which I take from my friend Italo Lins Lemos' doctoral thesis, In the opposite approaches, like pretense and make-believe, the attitude is what defines what fiction is how we behave towards it. But this won't work here because utopias, we shift attitude depending on how we use the object as a work of art or as a call for social and political discussion. So it seems to me that utopias are like an artifact or something like that, and we can shift our attitude depending on how we can do. But this is really a topic for another work. Perhaps Italo could help me co-author on that or something like that. I've been thinking about that. So thank you very much. This has been my presentation. There's my email address. I think we can talk a little bit more. There's time. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you for your nice talk. So we have some time for questions, like 5 minutes. Iago, go ahead. We can't hear you.
Oh yeah, my microphone was turned off, sorry. So thank you, Ivan. My question is more related to what is really an utopia and how could you set the boundaries for an utopia? Because it seems like general boundaries are really hard to set and they shift as time goes on, and you can, I don't know, you have really different works from different authors that are in the same genre, really similar works. So how could you do this? Wouldn't, like, if we just set up the same attitude that we take for, I don't know, your favorite utopia and apply it to Harry Potter, wouldn't Harry Potter be considered an utopia?
That's an interesting point. Nice to see you, Iago, even though online. Great. Utopia as a genre is quite very well demarcated as a literary philosophical genre. So you can pinpoint the baptism of the genre in Thomas More's Utopias, right? The beginning. But then there's an understanding that it began before that, like in Plato's Republic or in Augustine's City of God. And well, then you have lots of it. But then in the 19th century, it starts to ramify and open many different senses of utopia. So you have, for instance, some works by Dostoevsky are considered anti-utopias. There's this idea. And then with H.G. Wells, you have ambiguous utopias and so on, and so on, and so on. But the general idea is that utopia is a work of fiction in which you have a travel somewhere, and in that somewhere, in that area, so you have to travel to some point or to some time. Sometimes there's this idea, but after this travel, you get to a place where you see a social arrangement that could offer some ideas that could bring some ideas for you to compare with your own social arrangement. So in that sense, I wouldn't say that Harry Potter can be considered a utopia, because the social arrangement in Hogwarts is not the point of the story. I mean, they have a social arrangement in there, and we could use that to organize a school or something like that. But then we are starting to look at that as a utopia, but that's not the point. I mean, that's sort of, you miss the genre. But yeah, I understand that in this more philosophical, or in the sense of a social scientific model, they could be like a little fuzzy frontier, but the literary genre is more, it's quite well defined. I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Thank you. I think my worry is still there, but you more or less right for me. Thank you.
Okay, Elisa?
I want just to ask you something about science fiction. So I have the impression that your proposal is mainly a functional proposal of fiction, and it seems to work through fiction in order to elaborate something, while many cases science fiction is just appreciated by itself, at least as far as I know, I understand it. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Thank you, Elisa. This is a very nice question. Indeed, I think even utopias, classical utopias, can be appreciated just as fiction. And this is how most people read Brave New World. They don't read as, well, a proposal or something. Or if you look at some lesser-known utopias, such as the supplement to Bougainville Voyage by Denis Diderot, people read that as not really as a utopia to offer in a political debate or something, even though that was Diderot's intention. Diderot wanted to write that as a utopia. But we tend to read that just, well, let's have fun. I mean, and that's how we read most science fiction, and that's it. But then this is the difference. This is the differential point in Neurath's work. He wants these pieces of work, even if they are just for fun, or if they are, that they could offer ideas to social science. So there is this shift of function. So if I understand your contribution, you're saying that perhaps we're no longer in the realm of fiction now. We're just shifting function to, and then, well, but we're still in imagination, right?
Okay, Felipe?
Yeah, so thanks, Ivan, for the talk. So I'm just trying to understand a little bit better, like the concept of utopia. I'm sorry, I had to leave in the middle of a talk for some minutes, so sorry if you already talked about this. So if I understand correctly, an utopia will be like what genre in which those social arrangements, it's like it's the main function of the genre, right? So it prompts people to think about, to imagine different social arrangements. Is that right? Yes. So, but if I understand correctly, like anything can become a utopian. Like it does not need to have like this intentional element of prompting the reader to think about social arrangements, but perhaps no, the intention was not that, but can become slowly become an utopia, through time, as people use the book or the narrative in this manner. So is that allowed, in this account? Like what determines whether something is a utopia or not is use, how people use the narrative in their practices. Is that the view?
Yeah. Well, if you consider it as a literary genre, then no. Then there are some features in the literary genre that have to be followed up. Like there must be a travel in space or time, or even in ideas or something. There must be a specific focus on the functioning of the social arrangement and all. But then as we start to look at Neurath's proposal, then we are starting to take these and bring into perspectives of social science and discussions of social science. And then, well, what keeps us from doing that with other works that are not literary utopias, but could be utopias in Neurath's sense? So that could offer us a model for social science. Perhaps I'm going back to Iago's point, but this is the point. I mean, we could use different models as if they were utopias in Neurath's sense. But then the literary genre is something different. It's something else that's very well specified. Yes. And Felipe, thank you for your talk. I look forward to you publishing the social understanding of make-believe, got really interested and enthusiastic about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Felipe. Thank you, Sitian, for your presentations this morning. We will take a short break now,